as 2024 is officially coming to an end, I kind of thought to myself, what were some things during the entire year and quite possibly even earlier that we might have forgotten? As a player base, obviously, when the game updates, we tend to rush and immediately go to a new area, forgetting about absolutely everything that was around us before. Every once in a while, I do like to actually revisit a lot of the older areas and kind of see what we might have forgotten as a whole. So let's go ahead and take the time and actually revisit absolutely everything we could have, might, and quite possibly forgotten as a community base. Also, I forgot to mention that 80% of you guys are not subscribed. You should probably subscribe, as it does help me out come out with more content like this for you guys. And obviously, during 2025, I would absolutely love to reach 100,000 subscribers. Otherwise, this thing is gonna get you, and I don't think you want it to get you. It's gonna eat everything inside of your house. But until then, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. So of course, in World 1, remember when we had a voting booth at the very beginning of launch? And at some point, I don't remember when I actually noticed it, but it was essentially gone. Now, what could have this been possible for us to do with? Now, developers, for some unknown reasons, deleted this and essentially left an empty space here. I am curious to see what you guys personally think this could have been, whether it was for voting for pets, new worlds, new events, mini games, stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure, but at some point, this was deleted and essentially scrapped at some point. Speaking of World 1, remember this door? Now, this door is unlockable. There's supposed to be a key here, and essentially, we're supposed to go in it, right? This is somewhat comparable to Pet Simulator X in the first world area. When you spawn in, there is an area near the trading section where you can go ahead and open up a door. Though in that area, you were able to unlock it and essentially hatch pets. But for this area in the new game, this is replaced, at least at the time, during March for an event, and this whole area just essentially gets depleted and turns into a giant bridge. Now, I don't believe there's any type of correlation between the two, but this is somewhat of a bit of a mystery for me because it is an unlockable door. We just don't know what's behind the door itself. This is another one of those things that we kind of forgot, but essentially question what it could have been. Now, this one's going to be a little weird because a lot of the mini games, a lot of players out there do not play anymore. Me specifically, I find it to be a lot more easier for myself to just go ahead and go out into the trade hub and buy the missing pets that I'm missing. But when they did start introducing huge pets in these, it became pretty active until it was just more easier for the player base to go out into the trade hub and essentially buy these, with the exception of the huge rainbow pets that you could get out of them. Daily quests. This was another one that I thought was really interesting at the time. You essentially were able to pick a card and it could be any card. Then afterwards, when you do pick one, it would give you a little quest that you go ahead and complete out. For this one specifically, I have to earn 3,000 diamonds in order to get the bundle of enchant. Afterwards, the daily quest is officially done and over with, and you cannot repeat this until the very next day. Over time, this machine itself, or this little quest thing, became a little obsolete once you go into a new world. And over time, I essentially just kept forgetting to come back to the machine itself every single time that I finished something. And I don't know if this happened to any other players out there, but I tend to forget a lot of things throughout the day, so this became one of them. And of course, the Comet Shower. Now, this was somewhat new to the game, and eventually, just as quickly as it came in, it quickly went out of date. Now, over time, they did introduce a comet book, which would essentially launch a giant comet into your zone and you would break it. Over time, I noticed that a lot of players complained that the Comet Shower just didn't activate too often and it only threw maybe 3 to 4 at the time. So eventually, it became out of date and replaced with the comet book enchant. And with the massive amount of comets that we were able to farm, eventually made this a little obsolete. And since we're here still in the first world, remember when the flower garden area was such a big deal? We were able to farm a bunch of diamond seeds through the garden merchant, at the time at least, and potions itself to farm for gems, and even the seed bag. Eventually, you were not able to earn enough gems to utilize and just consistently come back into World 1 and be bothered with this area anymore. But though, as much as I complain about it, a lot of new players do end up playing this area primarily to go ahead and utilize for gem making methods. This is still a valid method for newer players, just not for the veterans that already got over this area. And once in a great while, I do like to revisit it and see what I might have forgotten to actually collect and replant things to go ahead and just come back at some point during the days, the weeks that might come, and I might just go visit it again. So, of course, we also had our little display for our clan stuff. Obviously, I own the Oni's clan, so I'm able to visually see the little thing right here, the little banner. But the most important thing was essentially what they added into the game, which we still have no answers for, and I could only contemplate what it could have been. And it is this ginormous castle. At the time, I'm not sure if I'm having some sort of Mandela effect or something or whatever, but I remembered that people were talking about this and seeing pictures of it being a clan hub, meaning that this is where your clan would hang out and you guys would just essentially just chill here. But as the time progressed, we kind of just forgot about it. You guys can let me know down in the comments down below what you guys think this castle could have been, because I essentially forgot. And eventually, once we did graduate from the daily quests, we were given a 3-day quest system, which again, it still works the same way as the daily quest. You do get a better reward system out of this, but eventually, like I said before, the rewards just did not do it enough for a lot of players out there to consistently keep up with this. And again, it became one of the forgotten little things inside of the game itself that we just tend to forget. So the dealer merchant, this is one of the more forgotten things that I personally just kind of forgot very quickly, if not maybe the same day, and I'll explain why. So when this update released and we saw the dealer merchant, we were told that we can go ahead and basically sell our extra items, which was really good at the time. But the problem was the loot that we had was more valuable back then comparable to now. So these 2 magnet flags were really important. We didn't have a super magnet book and we only had the magnet 3 at the time. Selling 2 of them for 100 gems seemed like a really good idea, but we did not have the capabilities of continuously farming it the way that we are now, making this a little bit more difficult for a player to go ahead and sell these because they were really important at the time. Eventually, the gems that we were supposed to be given for these items were just not worth it at the end of the day, and it became another one of those things that we just tend to forget and just got over it very quickly. Now, this one might be just a little debatable depending on who you're asking. The index collection. Now, the more pets at the time when this was released, the more that you collected, you were given currency. You can then turn that currency into items. Now, this became a really good farm at the time for specific items that were really hard to get. But because eventually absolutely everything on this list, with the exception of that clan ticket, is super duper easy to get if you have the certain abilities to get these items such as game passes, enchants, stuff like that. And of course the availability of them being in the trade hub for relatively cheap, causing this to be obsolete over time. So it looks like we made it to the very end of the first world. Now, as much as I love coming down here, sometimes it makes me wonder what the castle could have been, what could be behind that locked door in the first world area, and what could have the voting booth been. Let's go ahead and go into World 2 and see what we're able to find. So, February 24th, 2004, we were actually able to do our very first event here, where we're able to go ahead and farm the huge happy computer and get a ton of these at the time. But what were some key points that everybody really liked, but essentially ended up forgetting and forgotten inside of Pet Simulator 99 as a whole? Let's go ahead and find out. To be honest, I want to say for all of the mini games, including the Diamond Wheel, a lot of them were actually just forgotten. So we're just going to go ahead and name all of them right here as the hoverboard obby, as just completely forgotten. So just like the daily and the 3-day weekly quests, guess what we have now? The weekly quests. This works exactly the same way, just with better rewards, and honestly, this was a really good one, except that you could only do it once a week. So eventually, because it is a once a week system, of course, absolutely everybody is going to just kind of naturally forget. And welcome to the item creator. At the time, I actually used this a lot. And what does this actually do? Well, if you do certain quests, you were given an item. Now, at the time, this was a really good farm for piñatas. Of course, when piñatas and gems were more valuable back then. So clearly, you can see how important this could be. The people that can mainly answer this are the veterans that did actually start off the game the same way we all did. Of course, it's one of those moments where you had to have been there in order to go ahead and experience what I'm actually speaking of. So a lot of the newer player base might be like, well, pinatas are really easy to get, which they are. But back then, they were relatively hard to get, and they were valued a little bit more than what you're seeing currently here. So with gems being the way that they are right now, it's probably just a lot more easier to go ahead and farm them in the last area and even buy them in the trade hub. Now this one is interesting because a lot of the pets inside of Pet Simulator 99 that you see that are actually NPC models, they're inside of the game. But there's an exception of maybe 3 pets that I've visually seen so far that are huges that have not been added into the game. This is a huge nuclear agony. We do have a huge nuclear dog, so don't get those two confused because they look exactly the same, but they are completely different. This is one of the pets that I noticed that we never got in the game, and I thought at some point we could have. All the way in the back though, you can see a little nuclear axolotl. This is also a part of that little thing too as well, because I thought this was also going to be introduced at some point during this world update, but it just never was. And of course we had an astronaut dog, which was also something that was added into the game as an NPC, but we just never saw be added as a huge pet in the game. So I'm wondering what in the world happened and what could have this been in the game for. Obviously we don't have these updates where it would make sense to have a little astronaut dog or a huge nuclear agony or a nuclear axolotl, so that's kind of curious to me. Alright, so you guys can see the Zone 141 quest system right here where we're able to do certain item quest thingies right here, and essentially we were able to earn certain currency, which we can go ahead and convert that currency into a new area here, which is the Adventurous Store. The Adventurous Store actually had these little scrolls that we can go ahead and collect, and the more that you collect, the more things that you can actually buy out here. Now at the time when this was released, a lot of players were just farming the Adventurous loot box. At the time, this was going for a lot of gems, and I mean a lot of gems, which was a lot harder to get back then. So of course, naturally, everybody came here to just focus on this specific item. Of course, over time, because everything, like I said before, lost value, it's just easier to go out into the trade hub and buy these. Okay, and the next area that we have is the forge machine. Now, this was one of those concepts that sounded really good on paper, but when it was implemented, a lot of the player base basically said you guys are crazy and we don't like this. At the time, you were able to go ahead and craft certain items using leftover things. We'll go ahead and use the charm stone for example. So all of these 5,000 little bonus charms with a value of 2 million gems can go ahead and be converted into 50 whole charm stones. But at the time, the problem was you had to sacrifice too much for very little return. So this applies to the other 2 items that you can go ahead and create as well. People would rather keep the lower tier items and bulk them up and sell them as a bulk versus just creating maybe just a small pinch of certain items in the game. So eventually this became another machine that just ended up being forgotten and not used at all. Now, in their defense, if we were to go ahead and use this machine consistently and aggressively, and there was too much of a value placed on these things, meaning if there's too many in the game, this would have blown up the economy a little bit more quicker than we think it would have. This would have broken the large gift bags and essentially caused a gem inflation, and I don't know if anybody might have realized that at the time, but this was probably to prevent how much we could farm and how much bots could essentially farm, because this could have broken the game. At least that's just my 2 cents on it. I could just see it being a prevention to essentially farm the heck out of this and abuse it essentially. That's how I see it. Might be different for everybody else, but it is a forgotten machine at the end of the day. So it looks like we are officially at the very end of the second world, and eventually we were introduced to Void World. This was probably one of the moments where you had to be online and you had to experience it to get that nostalgic feeling of actually finally getting to Rebirth 8 and finally going into the new world when it was introduced at the time. So let's go ahead and venture out into the final world area and see what we're able to find. So we have officially made it to Void World. Now, keep in mind, this list is going to be relatively short considering the fact that this is our final area. Now, every single area here was unlocked by just one singular update. Let's go ahead and find out what we can find and see what we can go over and see what we forgot. So starting with Prison World, I did notice that we tend to forget a lot of things that were added into the game, such as an event or a clan battle. At the time when this was introduced, we were essentially supposed to get a ton of prison drop, meaning that the key played a big part in this. But over time, once the event was over and done, we weren't able to earn as many keys as we thought we were able to earn, eventually causing this to just basically be forgotten. Now, over time again, the prices dropped for the huge pet itself, creating just a bit of a deflation on them, making it not worth taking the time to go ahead and essentially try to farm these keys, if they even exist anymore, to go ahead and try to get the huge pet out of this. Of course, this was a really good memory of mine, just essentially getting a bunch of these huges. By a bunch, I'd probably mean like 4 at the most, but still, this was a really good memory at the time. And of course, with the little Pineapple Island, and I like to call it the Pineapple Island, we were also given a jungle boss fight. This essentially allowed you to go ahead and fight a giant chest, which essentially dropped loot and even quite possibly a huge pet out of this. Of course, once newer updates came out, this ended up being forgotten by a lot of players out there, including myself, and eventually, the seashell machine was also no exception to this. You could still get seashells, but it is very scarce at this point. Of course, you can go out into the trade hub and essentially buy these seashells, though they still go for 1,000 gems, and technically, there is still a bit of a profit margin depending on who you're buying from, if those players are still buying and selling these. Out of the 2,000 that I can go ahead and convert, I can make 4 gift bags. So while I'm here, I might as well do that right now. And we are here in Hacker World. Now, what are we here for specifically? Well, number 1 is the hacker chest. Well, yes, this chest is extremely beneficial for a lot of players out there. It's extremely impossible to get the keys out of this area, causing this to be extremely forgotten. Now, based on the big games database and just essentially what they've spoken about before, zone areas can drop zone dedicated items, and Hacker World seems to be a really hard place to get these keys from. Even with the book itself, you don't get the keys. Now, there was a lot of contemplation whether or not you get the key drops only by breaking the big chest that spawns, this one right over here, but I haven't dedicated much time to go ahead and test this out, and it's nearly impossible to find these keys in the trade hub. Over time, a lot of players out there just kind of gave up on this concept and essentially just stopped trying, making it one of the forgotten worlds, and one of the very few chests that garners a pet that still it has not gone down in value dramatically enough. Only 200 of these exist at a whopping 287 million gems. This alone should tell you how hard it is to get these keys. Based on a lot of other huge pets from the chests, this is one of the ones that did not lose value. And welcome to the rich world, where we were able to use raffle tickets to go ahead and essentially try to win a huge pet out of this area here. Now, of course, this is one of those things where it is still worth to do only if you're trying to get the rainbow variant of this pet. Other than that, I don't see many people trying to attempt to do this other than just trying to get the rainbow version of this. We'll go ahead and enter this and see how much of a percentage I have right now to go ahead and see how active this is currently going for. So 40 million in tickets in this area. Let's go ahead and find out. So I have a 14% chance to go ahead and win this. This tells me that there is enough people to go ahead and kind of still utilize this, but I think it's more active just because of the fact that there is a rainbow pet, though there's still 30 minutes on this board. So Elemental World, I am 50-50 on this area considering the fact that people do still come here. But why? Apparently getting the huge pets from this area is really easy now compared to what it was before. Supposedly, I don't actively come into the section because of how easy it is for me to just go into the trade hub and buy the huges itself. Though over time, that huge electric penguin became a plague inside of the trade hub for quite some time. They became extremely common to see. So eventually, it was just easier for me to go ahead and buy them rather than coming out here to attempt to get these, making it one of the things that I ended up personally forgetting myself. And welcome to the very last area, Olympus World. Now, this area I only technically come into if I actually need to go ahead and train my pets, or if I want to go ahead and gem grind. Because this is the last area of the world, this isn't technically a forgotten section too much, because we do have to come down here if we want to go ahead and be able to do certain things down here, such as item grind, rank grind, and gem grind. Though the events that have been pushed out during the past month made it a little bit impossible for us to actually go ahead and come come back here and dedicate some time to. From time to time, I will actually give up on certain events and just come over here. Though, because of how common events became, I almost forgot that this area even existed. I became a event world hopper, essentially just by living inside the event worlds. I even forgot at some point some of these pets actually even existed. I'm not sure about you guys, but it kind of feels weird being in this area rather than an event world area because of how common it is to just be inside of a different world other than the one that we're technically able to farm in, such as gem, loot, anything here. It just kind of feels weird. I don't know if it's just me or if you guys share the same feeling. So as the year is headed to a end, 2024's chapter is officially closing with 2025 rapidly coming in. The game has changed so much drastically to the point where we have gargantuan pets. Never in a million years did we ever think that Titanics were going to be the last pet that was going to be the largest. To be quite honest, even though that the game has forgotten a lot of things, and essentially us as a whole, as a community, we just tend to play as the game progresses. From time to time, I will come back to certain areas to revisit them, but alas, the show must go on with everything else, and eventually I will have to snap back to reality and just go back to the regular updates of the game. Though, again, it is nice to revisit past areas and just kind of see what we were able to do and what we essentially forgot. Now, there is one more that I wanted to go ahead and talk about, and that was the mystery ticket. That one was probably one of the most mysterious things that we were able to do inside of the game. And yes, we still don't know what this does. I'm not sure what the developers did plan for doing a ton of those area quests, meaning that we had to find a bunch of little secrets here and there during the update times, and we were able to do this twice. So if you missed the first round of tickets that were limited, they had a different event which was also limited. After that, it just kind of went radio silent. So I'm not sure if this year, when it concludes, if the new one will introduce something maybe perhaps where we can utilize a lot of these things that might have been forgotten and finally see what they have, such as that world castle that we saw inside of the first world, and quite possibly some of those pets that we saw that were not utilized inside of the game. And finally, maybe quite possibly find out what the mystery ticket is finally used for. With this video coming to an end, I would love to hear what you guys think your favorite part of this year's update was. And this can be absolutely anything. So I hope you guys had a really good holiday and now a happy New Year's. Until then, go ahead and make the joke, Vapor. Make the joke. I'll see you guys next year. Until then, bye everyone.